our next form of writing I've generally called lists. Now, especially in things like the book of Numbers, we find endless lists. And our best intent is often we start with good intent. We read a couple of verses of these lists that so-and-so had so many people, and this particular tribe who had this particular leader, and that leader had so many sons, and each of these sons had so many people in his particular... And the truth of it is that we haven't gone very far, and we already stop reading. And we ask ourselves, well, why do we need to worry about all these lists? I mean, what are they all about? Well, you need to come to terms with the fact that the lists are important. And why are they important? Well, I'm sure for many of you, maybe you've read a newspaper article, and all of a sudden you realize that the newspaper article has your name in it. And you said, it's quoted by Martin Levine. Martin Levine said the following. And you know, there's that sense of going, oh, look, I'm here. Well, it's that concept that we need to realize is in that lists as well, is that these are people who took genealogy and family very seriously. You know, the thing is that for so often when we look at the Tanakh, we can think of it as being just a whole lot of stories, made up stories from long ago. But when we see those lists, when we see those lists of names, all of a sudden we move away from just being characters in a story to being real people with real names, with real families, with real connections. All of a sudden, they become real. They become real people. And that's what they would have done for the people who they were written for originally. Is that for them, it gave them a connection. It gave them an anchoring point into the past. That, of course, when the Bible talks about us all descending from the sons of Noah, we realize that, in fact, what that was meant to do was it was meant to give us an anchoring point, a point of connection into the past that would keep us going all the way through into the future. One of the greatest things that we suffer from in this day and age is a lack of identity, especially for us in colonies where we are such a mix of different cultures and ethnicities and connections. Often we find that we're a little bit at sea. But you know, the thing that happened for Jewish people, even when they were spread out across the world, is they retained their sense of connection. Why? Because their holy scriptures gave them access to real people, a real anchor point, a real connection into the past, which drew them, which they could draw from into the present and then work with into the future. So when you read the lists, don't see them as just a whole bunch of names which don't make any sense. Because often, sometimes right in between there, you see a gem. Often the gems are there in terms of the interaction of the people with each other. Often you get a little gem about their particular livelihood. And often some very small facts, a very small understanding. But remember that all those small things are written there on purpose. They're written there to make those people real. Because the people who would be reading them would need to remind themselves always that they didn't just appear on the screen. They didn't just come by happenstance, but rather that in fact they were there as part of a legacy that goes all the way back in God's blessing and God's connection with them. When people began to understand that, it gave them a sense of anchoring, of identity, of purpose. And for us as Christians, we need to realize that Paul talks about being grafted into Israel. That for us as Christians, as Gentiles, we've been grafted into Israel. And if we're grafted into Israel, what it means now is that those names, those lists of people in the Tanakh are now our family too. They are our ancestors. They're the ones who drew us to this point where in fact we now have become part of the vine. We've become part of that family tree. That genealogy is not only a genealogy of people from another tribe, another group, another ethnicity, but in fact those people now have become part of our family. Or at least maybe we've become part of theirs. We've been adopted into their family. So when you read the lists, don't just ignore them, but read them as a chronicle of your family.